Dungeons & Dragons, we need to have a frank and honest discussion. I'm not mad. Well, I am a little bit mad, particularly that you make me keep buying the same 3 books in 3 different formats, but I'm not here to talk to you about that today. No, what I want to talk to you about is what the hell are we doing with the histories of our playable species? I really want to know. Perhaps I should elaborate a bit more for those of you who are not on board with this particular rant. See, we all know that Dungeons & Dragons lore is a big stupid quilt written by thousands of people over 5 decades. And as a result of this, something strange has begun to happen with the various playable species of D&D characters. They come down with a bad case of what I like to call multiple choice origin stories. See, occasionally when a new edition comes out, they will attempt to kind of reboot or revamp what the origin of a particular character species is. And they will do this in flagrant disregard of what the previous origin lore has been for that species. And if you're the kind of lonely nerd who looks up character histories and species histories on the internet before writing backstories for player characters and NPCs, this can get really goddamn confusing! And it's just gotten a little out of control. The worst offenders are, of course, creatures like Dragonborn. Dragonborn have like 4 origin stories, and possibly another one. Thank you very much, Matthew Mercer! But we'll get to that a little bit later. For now, I'm going to make things easy for everyone. I'm going to go through each of the new species in the player's handbook and give you all of their definitive origin stories, the histories of these various playable species that you can all enjoy in the new 2024 Player's Handbook on this weeks/months after it has been released. Sorry, it took me a while to pull things together. I was really hoping back they'd bring shard mines, and I just haven't been the same since I realized they were never coming back. God, remember when they created humanoid creatures that were just psychic clusters of sentient crystals and then decided to give them tits? D&D used to be great. Alright, bring out the first offender, Aasimar. 2 to 3 origin stories, a grade D offender. Not egregious, but headed down a dark path. Luckily, all of their origins seem to share similar themes, so just keep your nose clean, Aasimar. We all know Aasimar, right? They're angel people, like celestial beings. But what do we know about Aasimar? Well, if you go ahead and read the player's handbook, it has the following to say about Aasimar. Aasimar, pronounced Aasimar, thank goodness I got it right, are mortals that carry the spark of the upper planes within their souls. Whether descended from an angelic being or infused with celestial power, they can fan that spark to bring light, healing, and heavenly fury. Aasimar can rise among any population of mortals. They resemble their parents, but they live for up to 160 years and have features that hint at their celestial heritage. Luminous eyes, metallic flakes, wings, whatever. Yada yada yada. So that's a pretty good description of what an Aasimar is, but it doesn't tell us whence the Aasimar came from, or what specifically they are. It just gives some non-answer of, I don't know, celestial something or other. So let's talk about what Aasimar are and where they come from. Now, we've been familiar with Aasimar ever since 2nd edition, and going way back in the day, they used to be classified as plane-touched beings. Planes-touched beings used to be a catch-all term for one of your parents wasn't from around here. This included creatures like Aasimar, as well as all different kinds of genasi, and of course tieflings. Broadly, the old wording just said that Aasimar were descended from celestials or other beings of pure good alignment, and were predisposed towards good, unless you were fallen Aasimar, and then you could be edgy and call yourself Grim Blackdark, the fallen angel. And that's it, right? What a beautiful, nice, simple origin story for a player character species. You're descended from celestial beings. Your parent, maybe your grandpappy was a celestial being, and now you're an Aasimar. Isn't that great? Wouldn't that be nice and simple? And wouldn't it be a shame if I just dumped all this complicated, nonsensical lore on it like I'm about to do? Because Deva and Aasimar have been used interchangeably. And the lore explains this as, in places where Deva did not exist, people referred to Aasimar as Deva because they didn't know what a Deva was. And furthermore, there are 2 kinds of Deva. The player character Deva, which we all only saw it in 4th edition, and the player character devas were these kinds of multiple reincarnated godlike beings that had infinite memories from infinite past lives. Can't imagine why they didn't bring that shit back. And the other version of devas are these kinds of angelic messengers that look like beautiful men and women with flowing, beautiful, feathery wings. So which one is it? Obviously, none of these are Aasimar. So, where did the Aasimar come from? Well, obviously, they just got it on, your ancestors got it on with some celestial or godlike being, and now you're an Aasimar, right? Wrong! I wish it was that simple. Because it turns out, way back in ancient times, a group of people called the Milani were transported to the Forgotten Realms from another plane. Yeah, it turns out humans can transport from other dimensions as well. Isn't that fun? So, once the Milani arrived in Toril in the Forgotten Realms, they got a little homesick, and they wanted to see their gods again. So they all prayed for their gods to come see them, and the Milani gods came down in mortal avatars and summoned all of their attendants and servitors with them, and those attendants and servitors were supposed to be the first devas. But those first devas were also called Aasimar, and they were called Aasimar in the land of Mulhorand, which doesn't exist anymore because it was destroyed during the Spell Plague. So maybe the first Aasimar are these celestial servitors? Who knows? It's all so vague and confusing. My prescription? Simple. We just leave the Aasimars come from the celestial lineage origin stories, but we need to firmly define what a deva is. Bring out the next accused, Dragonborn. 3 origin stories, with a potential 4th, thanks to a Mr. Matthew Mercer, a grade A offender. Dragonborn give me all kinds of issues. And the fact of the matter, we haven't even really had Dragonborn for that long. I believe they first came into existence in 4th edition. So we shouldn't have this many backstories for a character we've only had for 2 editions. And the whole thing is just silly on its face. I mean, outwardly, the existence of Dragonborn seems completely superfluous. You do not need Dragonborn because you have half-dragons, which are functionally the same goddamn creature. I have no proof of this, so take this as the ramblings of a far too tired old man. But I believe the reasoning behind this is that you couldn't have players playing half dragons all the time because they could half those dragons with too many other different types of creatures. And most half dragons, as listed in the specific rules of alignments in the monster manuals, have to be evil aligned. And so the idea comes that you need to create a dragon humanoid species that can be good aligned for players to play without the sticky issue of making them half-breeds with vampires or Tarrasques or whatever the fuck. What kind of backwards ass thinking is that? Just say some of the half-dragons are good. Why are we doing this? But no, we have to have this overcomplicated nonsense. So here's the overcomplicated nonsense. The origins of Dragonborn are frequently described as shrouded in myth, which I think is code for the writers couldn't figure out which backstory they wanted to settle on, so they just added all of them. Alright, so let's get to the broad strokes. The broad strokes are Dragonborn are not from Toril. They're from Abir. Abir, for those who do not know, is a section of Toril, so Toril used to be known as Abir Toril. Abir Toril exploded, and the section known as Abir was launched into space. That's all I'm saying. I am not going to talk about this further, and I will not be taking questions. Here's where things start to split up into multiple choice. So there's one story that says that Dragonborn formed from draconic eggs. Those eggs were touched by dragon gods to ensure that they would give birth to a race of humanoid, dragon-like figures known as Dragonborn. Or maybe it was mortal dragons. Or maybe those eggs were affected by the energies of the astral sea and the elemental chaos, and that caused the Dragonborn to be brought forth. Or maybe the Dragonborn were created by a dragon god to be servants for dragons. Or maybe the Dragonborn sprung forth from the spilled blood of an ancient war between primordial gods. Or maybe Dragonborn were created to be a perfect image of the perfect dragons to be the companions of the god known as Lo. Or maybe we should just pick one origin story and stick to it. That's not even all of them. There's a last one where a bunch of ancient dragons known as the Platinum Cadre believed in an alternate history where the Dragonborn were all descendants of the ancient Dragonborn of Bahamut, except the Chromatic Dragonborn, which were believed to be descendants of Tiamat or Sarador. And I honestly think Sarador is just Tiamat wearing a pair of fake sunglasses and a mustache. You can see how this can all get out of hand rather quickly. A lot of this is very integral stuff when it comes to building a character backstory. And depending on which origin your player reads, or you as a player reads when you create your Dragonborn, you might create a Dragonborn with a very disparate idea of who they are in the world. So why can't we settle on one? Things get even more complicated as the history progresses. The one thing all the histories can agree upon is apparently that at some point, Dragonborn were enslaved to other dragons, and they were made to be servants and an underclass to the powerful dragon lords of Abir. But they also have another history after that that says that they had this vast empire and they were at war with tieflings. So, I don't know. Again, we've only been using Dragonborn as playable characters since 4th edition. It really shouldn't be this complicated by now. And I get it. Dragons are cool. Dragons kick ass. If you want to be a dragon character, that kicks ass. So people keep writing new stories about where their dragon characters came from, and we end up with this convoluted mess. Just pick an origin. I don't care which. Or better yet, scrap the whole works and just say half dragons can be good now and alignments are bullshit. There. I fixed Dragonborn. You're welcome.
Hello everyone, Editor Puck here. Sorry to interrupt things, but the 2024 Monster Manual came out while I was editing this video, and there was some new information with the half-dragons that I thought was pertinent. See, half-dragons seems to be distancing themselves from Dragonborn once again with the new edition. Half-dragons are no longer the result of what happens when the bard tries to seduce the dragon. They are instead created through magical rites and rituals involving the essence of dragons. So half-dragons are created through magical rituals and not breeding. So that seems to be a step to try and make the two species very different, and I guess that'll be the new half-dragon going forward. Everything I said still stands, except for this half-dragon thing that they've altered now. I'm sure it will gel with the previous lore very easily.
Now, next up, the next offender. A non-offender. Dwarves. Dwarves are perfect. Dwarves have had basically the same origin story since we first saw them in 1st edition. Dwarves come from the earth, and legend has it they were created by the dwarven god Moradin in his image from the earth. And sure, they say that's a myth, but it's the only myth they got, so that's what I'm going with! Like I said, dwarves are perfect. No notes. Moving on. Elves. Elves. Also very good. Although a little bit crazy in the subspecies department. Elves created by the elven god Corellon. They are created in Corellon's image. Used to be with Fae. There was a whole schism with Lolth. Lolth became the Spider Queen. Elves that follow Lolth become Drow. Other elves that didn't follow Lolth stayed regular elves. And then some went to the ocean. I don't know. Elves are weird. But largely elves, another good non-offender. Their origins have stayed mostly the same since 1st edition, although they do have a lot of disparate versions. But dwarves also had a lot of disparate versions back in the days. Like, you know, it didn't used to just be shield dwarves and like gold dwarves and stuff. It used to be like Arctic dwarves and wild dwarves and all these other things. But we don't do that anymore. Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah, next up, gnomes. Gnomes are on a slippery slope. They're a 2-time offender with 2 origin stories. Solid D-class offender. Let's talk a little bit about where gnomes come from. So gnomes have a bit of a sad backstory, and I'm going to talk about all of it because it's all very fascinating, and it may change the way that you build up your gnomes in the future when you're building gnome characters. Particularly, let's start with the origins of gnomes. There are currently 2 origins of gnomes, as I said previously. The more widely accepted, and probably the most true one, is that gnomes were created by the gnomish gods, and they were created from gemstones deep beneath the earth inside a mountain. Diamonds became rock gnomes, and emeralds became forest gnomes, and rubies became deep gnomes. And no other gems became gnomes. Sapphires don't get to be gnomes. They come in too many different colors. Pick a color, sapphires! From there, gnomes just had a really rough go of it. They were almost immediately enslaved by kobolds the moment after they were created, and then after they freed themselves from kobolds, they were enslaved by the Netherese. And then the Netherese controlled the gnomes for years and years and years and used various experiments on them, and that's how we got Spriggans, the corrupted fey creatures. But that also might not be true because it's said that they showed up much later than that. This era also gave credence to the rumor
and possible other origin of gnomes is that gnomes were created by Netherese wizards, which, if you're not familiar with the Netherese, it was an ancient magical empire that lived in floating cities in ancient Faerun. It was a kind of magocracy. Mages ruled everything. If you couldn't do magic, you were shit out of luck. It's a little like Black Clover, in fact. Shit, is Black Clover based on the Netherese? Magical kingdoms, a class system based entirely on levels of magical power, war with the elves. Black Clover might be based on the Netherese. Anyways, moving along. So there was another theory that the Netherese created gnomes to be perfect servants with magical power, but that one's probably not true either. It's just a rumor. The gnomes would eventually win their freedom from the Netherese through good old-fashioned revolt, protest, and revolution, gnomish rights all the way. Actually, during that time, gnomish refugees were sheltered by elves, and they developed a close relationship, and the elves taught gnomes magic. So if you're making a gnome character, they probably get along with elves pretty well. So yeah, gnomes have had a rough go of it, but they also have some interesting character backstory in there as well, and a pretty firmly established origin and another made-up one that's probably not true. So let's move on to Goliaths. Goliaths are a bit of we'll give them an ambiguous C, because they kind of only have one origin, maybe two origins, but also we kind of don't know, and we're getting a revamp in the new edition. So the new edition seems to want to style Goliaths as a kind of half-giant lineage, or a giant kind lineage, but it wasn't always this way. It used to be believed that Goliaths were related to stone giants or earth genasi in some way, back when they were introduced back in 3rd edition. We actually get a ton of information about them. If you look it up online, you can get details on their culture, the kind of games that they play, cultural festivals. It's probably the most detailed cultural layout that I've seen for any other D&D species. So again, we don't really have much of a clear origin. Probably the clearest origin story we get is that Goliaths were once humans, and these groups of humans wanted answers from their gods, so they climbed a mountain range that used to exist back in the Netherese Empire, known as the Columns of the Sky. And when they journeyed to these peaks, they became the first Goliaths somehow. So again, we don't have a ton of information to go off here, so maybe this just needs a whole revamp and we just give them ancient giant blood, give them like the celestial and the tiefling thing, where you get some giant blood somewhere in the past there, and whatever giant you got, that's the powers you get. Looks kind of like what they're doing there, but maybe they ought to write it down seriously, is all I'm saying. Far be it from me to critique how none of these people have proper origins. Kind of the premise of the whole video. Speaking of which, halflings. Total non-offender. No record. Cannot be given a grade. Because all of the halfling histories that I've found basically boil down to nobody cares where halflings come from. Which is wild to me. Every other species in Faerun, at least people care enough to make up an origin for, even if it's completely bullshit or there's 8 of them. But halflings, there's nothing. Even in the new player's handbook, they talk for 3-4 paragraphs, and all they do is talk about what halflings are and how halflings are cool and hospitable, and they never tell you where they come from. I have found 0 information on where halflings come from in my research for this video. All of the articles I find boil down to nobody gives a shit. So, fuck it. I'm gonna create the halfling origin right now. Halflings were created in the ancient Netherese Empire when Karsus, the greatest mage of all the Netherese, tried to create the perfect after-dinner bun, but left it in the oven too long. And that gave birth to the first halflings, which later escaped and began to colonize the hills and spread their hospitality, which was ingrained in them from the delicious yeast. That's the origin of halflings now. You don't like it? Find me another one, because I damn well like to hear it. Moving on. Humans. Humans just appear. Humans congeal from the bathroom grout of any world that is ever created, and then they begin to eat and mate across the universe until they've colonized everything. Humans just am. You gotta have humans. It's just gotta be in there. Next up, orcs. We already talked about orcs. We know where orcs come from. So another solid Class C offender. Orcs have 2 backstories currently, but they're also 2 different kinds of orcs. And also we might be in the process of a retconning of orc history. We'll see how it goes. But orcs traditionally came from some other world. They were taken here by a wizard who wanted to use them as an army to fight other wizards. And then again in ancient times where they started fighting against elves, the 2 different types of orcs are
gray orcs and mountain orcs. Mountain orcs are the more traditional pig-like orcs, and gray orcs are the orcs like you'd see in like games of World of Warcraft or Warhammer and stuff. More the kind of orcs that you're probably thinking of when you think of orcs if you're not thinking of pig-like orcs. I made a whole video about this, breaking down where the orcs come from and the differences between, and how even the pig-like orcs have had their pig-like traits scaled back over the years. But the new origin in the book kind of boils it down to, orcs were created by Grumpsh, and that's all we need to worry about. So, might be in the process of a retcon there. But yeah, orcs aren't from here. They're from another plane. They were brought here through portals to fight other people. Finally, last on our list is tieflings, a solid B class offender. Not for the number of origins that they have, but for the ambiguity and inconsistency of the only origin that we have for tieflings. My problem with tieflings is that it's hard to pin down specifically how a tiefling is created. It's stated in the player's handbook that tieflings are either born in the lower planes or have blood that links them to devils, demons, or other fiends. However, interspecies breeding with fiends is fucking complicated and doesn't make any sense, because this is also partially the description for what a cambion is. So what makes a cambion and what makes a tiefling? And it is the same process. What is the difference between the processes that causes the two different creatures? It is never clearly stated. In fact, even some of the old lore said that cambions came from half-fiend creatures like tieflings. So how do you get the tiefling if the cambion has to be born from the tiefling? And then also apparently cambions are born now when a mortal female is mated with a devil, but if a male mates with a succubus, it gives birth to an alu fiend. It's all so goddamn complicated. And the best explanation I can find in the lore is that a tiefling just has like older fiendish blood. So maybe they have like a cambion, and then like a cambion mates with a human, and that makes a tiefling. I'm not sure. It's not immediately clear, and I think that's the part that bugs me about it the most. Maybe there's a difference in the process. Maybe tieflings are created when a fiend has a child with a mortal creature, a non-fiend humanoid, that they truly love and care about, and that creates a tiefling. But if they do it maliciously, that creates a cambion. I don't know. There's no clear answer, and that's the part that drives me crazy, because everybody's making half-demon, half-fiend tiefling characters. It's like, I have a demonic dad, or I have a fiendish mother, or whatever, and that's not technically how that works. I don't know. It makes it hard to build characters. That's why I want answers. If one breeding process creates two completely different creatures, there needs to be some answers in how one creature is created over the other. I don't think that's too much to ask.
Hello everyone, Editor Puck here again. It seems the same thing has happened with cambions that has happened with half-dragons. Cambions are no longer half-fiend creatures, result of a union between a fiend and a humanoid. They are instead creatures that have been corrupted by the hells and turn into cambions as a part of a dark pact. Or you can have one of 6 origin stories. It's kind of funny. We started the video talking about multiple choice origin stories, and the solution for the cambion appears to be having a multiple choice origin. So cambions can be made by being possessed by a fiendish being resurrected by an evil magic user, lengthy exposure to the lower planes, wear a suit, making a bargain with a fiend, suffering from a god's curse, or taking part in a fiendish ritual. So that's how cambions are made now, and I hope that clears things up. Please, I throw it over to me for the closer.
But anyways, that's it for our journey through the various species of 5th edition, as told by the new 2024 handbook. I hope you found this insightful. I hope this has shed some light on the very confusing origins of the characters that we all enjoy playing in D&D. And if you'd like to have more D&D, you can find me on Start Playing, and you can join some of my Dungeons & Dragons games. I'm posting new ones every week, and you can play with me as your Dungeon Master. And that's it for now. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like this video, or tell me I'm wrong, or give me a better halfling origin if you can find one. That's it for now. Till next time, everyone. Puck out.